All right, we're in. Hi, guys. Man, I would have liked to have done a Sunday show, but man, I was funky. I was tired. I was funky. Um, I had a really great night, or I had a really great afternoon, though, because I had a new friend over who's a bass player. So we did some jamming, and we're going to do some more jamming in the future. He's a good dude, and he's a talented player, and we're just ironing out what we know and don't know about each other, and I dig how he plays, and he digs how I play. So we're gonna try and take my shred salad and turn it into a shred. Uh, it'll be like chopped cheese, but more nutritious. Oh, my people from the hood, you know about chopped cheese. I know you know about chopped cheese in the hood. All right. So anyway, all right, I'm playing the new Cryptopsy tonight as we go through the Temple Burnt and City Taken this evening. All right. So welcome to the show. Let me take a sip, and then we are going to be on our merry little way. After this chapter, we will be less than 50 pages to the end of the book. Isn't that exciting? By now, two of the legions had completed their platforms, and we're doing about 17 pages today. And on the 8th of Luce, Titus adored the rams to be brought up opposite the western arcade of the outer temple. For 6 days before they arrived, the most powerful batterer of all had pounded the wall incessantly without results. This, like the others, made no impression on the stones so huge and so perfectly bonded. See, here he is again, he implying something incredible about this architecture. And if indeed it is a historical fact that the Romans had trouble breaking it down now that they've reached the point of the extreme where they're at the gate of the temple and they won't open that gate. They're going to hold down, they'd rather die. And so this is where all the fireworks begin, I suppose. At the northern gate, a second team attempted to undermine the foundations, and the tremendous effort they did lever out the stones in front, but the inner stones supported the weight and the gate stood firm. Till, despairing of all attempts with engines and crowbars, they set up ladders against the colonnades. The Jews were in no hurry to stop them, but when they climbed up, they were violently assailed. Some were pushed backwards and sent headlong, others clashed with the defenders and were killed. Many, as they stepped off the ladders, were unable to get behind their shields before they were run through with swords, while a few ladders, crowded with heavy infantry, were pushed sideways at the top and overturned. The Jews, too, suffered severe losses. Those who had brought up the standards fought hard for them, knowing that it would be a terrible disgrace if they were captured. But in the end, the Jews even captured the standards, destroying every man who climbed up. The rest, demoralized by the fate of the fallen, withdrew. On the Roman side, not a man died till he had accomplished something. Of the partisans, all who had distinguished themselves in earlier battles shone once more in this, as did Eleazar, nephew of the party chief Simon. Titus, seeing that his attempts to spare a foreign temple meant injury and death to his soldiers, ordered the gates to be set on fire. At this time, two men deserted to him, Ananus from Emmaus, the most bloodthirsty of Simon's henchmen, and Archelaus, son of Megadatus. Is this the same Ananus that they were talking about all the way back in Herod's time? I believe it's not been too terribly a long period of time where Ananus would be very, very seasoned. If we're only talking about if he was a young man then, and then maybe I don't know how many years have exactly passed. I am not keeping the exact chronological record of the chapters per se, because I'm kind of understanding the whole, this was the Herod era. This is like the Nero era, the Vespasian era, so on and so forth. So anyway. And Archelaus, son of Magadus, expecting a free pardon as they were quitting the Jews when they were getting the better of it. Because, you see, that's one of the funky little things, right? Like, there will be other people that are a little bit more on the technical details of making sure you get the exact facts right. Me, I am looking for the flow of causality. I'm more interested in causality. And causality will help me keep order of operations correct. And that makes sense because it's part of the application of history is more important to me than exactly telling you the record. What are we doing now that is like the mistakes of the past, right? And I'm more interested in extrapolating those ideas. My commentary, my opinion, my basic sense of where my point of view is originating from. Denouncing this as another of their dirty tricks and aware of their habitual cruelty to their own people, Titus was strongly inclined to kill them both, pointing out that they had been forced to it by necessity and had not come by free choice. One second. I'm going to do that. I have to do that because that's all that'll keep it fitting on the screen. My apologies. Let me pull that down just a hair. Perfect. Okay, free choice. And that men did not deserve to live if they first set their own city on fire and then jumped clean. However, anger could not stand against his own pledged word, and he let the men go, though he did not grant them the same privileges as the others. By now the soldiers were piling fire against the gates. The silver melted and ran, quickly exposing the woodwork to the flames, which were carried from there in a solid wall and fastened onto the colonnades. When the Jews saw the ring of fire, they lost all power of body and mind. Such was their consternation that not a finger was raised to keep out or quench the flames. They stood looking on in utter helplessness. Yet their dismay at the present destruction made them no wiser for the future. But as if the sanctuary itself was already in flames, they whipped up their rage against the Romans. All that day and the following night the flames were in possession. The colonnades could not be fired all at once, but only bit by bit. The next day, Titus ordered a section of his army to put out the fire and to make a road close to the gates for the easier ascent of the legions. And by the way, one of the things that's kind of running in the back of my mind as well is seeing if there's any little breadcrumbs that help me bridge gaps between the hidden agenda, right? Because all this stuff is going to just basically sit on the shoulders of the Emperor of Rome as to why this is being made to happen, right? And Rome is supposed to be part of the example of the overextension of empire into becoming a dictatorship. And then because the Jews are always the worst to suffer when dictators arise, only Jews are allowed to be dictators. And that's how you get Netanyahu being a Yahoo. And but you see, the secret undergoing aspects is there's the Bach Saga side, which I bring up all the time because of its more academic kind of explanation unto itself. It just needs to be more proven, right? We need to get Lemminkainen Temple cracked open. Damn it. But there's also the dawn of our modern continuity of history, which goes way back into the BC, and we're talking about the certainty that we had this whole, throughout the whole world, there was no record-keeping system in the physical world, with the exception... no, I'm sorry. Let me... That's an ignorant statement. That's not what I mean. Okay. So, effectively, right, if you've got the biblical history hijacks predating histories because of deep misunderstandings of time passages in various aspects of the story, as well as some other paltered facts, such as who and when really the Exodus happened. And why the cult of Aton and its leader Akhenaten were of such consequence. Right? And this goes into a deeply occult, esoteric aspect of research that brings us to the Dark Syrians, the Anno Elohim, the Draconian reptilians. There are good reptilians, but the Draconian Empire reptilians, which is a model for the Empire on its base military level at the very least. Because then there's a whole infrastructure with the Tall Greys, the Mantids, and the Greys, and those are all sectionalized and all that stuff. That's the woo side of my life, which does fit with everything I am trying to do here, but it's a whole other discussion. There's other things you have to check out. This is why I go on about Black Earth Productions. But at the same time, Black Earth Productions is not for the profane, right? There's a whole lexicon of vernacular terminologies and contexts that are built upon. And if you're not capable of basically watching the videos in chronological order, or at least semi-chronological order, you might want to take the Magi Grail Shaman series, and you think you might be able to start with the first of that and move forward. And it's the Magi Grail Shaman series which gets to the crux of the matter as a whole, explaining the issues in Sumeria, the issues with the 19th dynasty, Akhenaten. When Akhenaten came in, I'm always going on about him and Atenism, and a few other details, right? Because there was a hijacking when they came in, and they made deals with the rabbis in the Bach Saga. That comes from my weird woo-woo side. I wouldn't expect Michel Merrill to co-sign that statement. I don't expect him to, unless, of course, he's been wooing it up. But I think it's much better if he just sticks to that, because it would hurt. I think it would hurt the reputation he's trying to preserve, and that's 10 times more important. So anyway, let's get back to the book, eh? The ascent of the then he summoned a council of war, attended by the 6 senior generals: Tiberius Alexander, the chief of staff, Sextus Zerilath, Larsius Lepidus, and Titus Phrygius, commanding the 5th, 10th, and 15th legions, respectively. All right, so they're having a whole new, like, they're not just like, they're looking at that. They think they've got a normal fortress siege tactic that they can, like, they're realizing they're going to need a little bit more than basic fortress siege tactics for this. So this, once again, is perhaps a truth that this was an extraordinary building. A building that was probably meant to last, like, and look as baller as it did then today. So anyway, commanding the 5th, 10th, and 15th legions respectively, Aeternius Fronto, tribune in charge of the 2 legions from Alexandria, and Marcus Antonius Julianus, procurator of Judea. After these, the other procurators and tribunes were brought in, and Titus invited opinions on the question of the sanctuary. Some insisted that they should enforce the law of war. There would be continual revolts while the temple remains as a rallying point for Jews all over the world. Others argued that if the Jews evacuated it and no armed man was allowed on it, it should be spared. But if they climbed on it for military purposes, it should be burnt down. It would, in that case, be a fortress, not a sanctuary. And from then on, the impiety would be blamable not on the Romans, but on those who forced their hands. Now get that. You know what that is? That is when Israel bombs a hospital in Palestine because they quartered troops, Palestinian warriors, in the hospital. All right? What the Romans are doing is deplorable. But they don't want to lose control of the value of this region in the greater scheme of the emperor's, world fucking dominance. You have to compete. And it's just like, do you get to be the empire, or do you just get to sit as a kingdom waiting for an empire to beat you up? No, you've got to empire up yourself. And so you take an imperial posture and you make sure you have land that can define you as an empire. Some empires are small, but they still count as empires. Even in like South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, which has no contact with any people, right? They got kingdoms and they got empires down there with their own economies. They're not being bothered by anything. They're doing their thing the black way. It's a very, very, very different system. Just like Japan is a very, very, very different system. And everybody gets upset when somebody invades because you're destroying someone else's way of life. And this is why Americans are upset about non-Americans. It's just like no nation needs to have a goddamn immigration policy of any sort. Each nation can just say no. Like, you get to visit, but you don't get to fucking, like you don't get to rent an apartment or buy a house or own any land. Right? You stay, you're just staying temp. You can do like hotels, you can do like Airbnbs or whatever, but your name's not on any lease. You're not doing a thing with a landlord, right? You're here on vacation or whatever, but you're not immigrating here, right? And you're here because we want something from you. If you like the way everybody else gets treated around here, start earning it, right? And that's a cold and callous statement for people that are struggling, that can see the benefit that this country can give them. But at the same time, we know that you're coming from a country and that you grew up in that environment and you don't necessarily have the same customs and understandings of things that we do, and you're going to cause too many problems, too many arguments, too many intermediary translators are needed. It puts too much stress on us. We have to spend our we have to put government coffers to that, which then dictates how much they need to find from taxes out of the system and people. And it's the worst when they just have to fucking raise your personal taxes for it. All this time, by the way, with Donald Trump and his fucking taxes, they're trying to fucking bitch about his personal taxes when all his wealth is in his fucking estate, and then he just keeps enough to take care of, like, his personal life. Otherwise, he's got all this profit within his estate, and then people are invested in that shit and all that shit. And that's the Trump Foundation. Right? And so they always were throwing that at you because they wanted you to hate something that you can fucking do, which is open up a fucking legitimate business that does legitimate things, and then you can just do all that shit to cut down your expenses, but it's all on the fucking books. There's no crime happening here. And you get to keep your taxes, your personal taxes, low. Anyway. And because you're operating a business that's making money and able to bring in a tax revenue for the state, and it doesn't tax it out of existence or regulate it out of existence, you boom. Now, this has nothing to do with this scenario, but because I'm trying to give you that chain of causality, right? Because these people, they have lost their care for this chain of causality. They are completely reverted into their singular flavor, their singular narrative of their ontology of all creation, because this is about them and their one true God situation. Okay? Tiberius Alexander, the chief of staff. Okay, I already read all that. Legions. Okay, Aeternius Fronto, tribune in charge of the 2 legions from Alexandria, and Marcus Antonius Julianus, procurator of Judea. After these, the other procurators and tribunes were brought in, and Titus invited opinion on the question of the sanctuary. Some insisted that they should enforce the law of war. There would be continual revolts while the temple remained as a rallying point for Jews all over the world. Others argued that that if the Jews evacuated it and no armed man was allowed on it, it should be spared. But if they climbed on it for military purposes, it should be burnt down. It would, I know I read all that again, but I just, I'd been talking for too long, so I just went with it. It would, in the case, be a fortress, not a sanctuary, and from then on, the impiety would be blamable not on Romans, but on those who forced their hands. Titus replied that even if the Jews did climb on it for military purposes, he would not make war on the inanimate object instead of men. Of whatever happened, burn down such a work of art. It was the Romans who would lose thereby, just as their empire would gain an ornament if it was preserved fronto. Alexander and Zerilath now confidently came over to this opinion. So there still seems to be largely the conversation of the solution needs to involve preserving the building. So Titus thereupon adjourned the meeting and instructing the officers to give the remainder of the army time for rest so that he should find them full of new vigor when fighting was resumed. He ordered the picked men of all the cohorts to make a road through the ruins and put out the fire. All that day, exhaustion and consternation subdued the enterprise of the Jews, but on the next, having recovered both strength and confidence, they made a sortie through the east gate against garrison of the outer temple at about 8 a.m. Their onslaught met with stubborn resistance from the Romans, who sheltered behind a wall of steel and closed their ranks, though it was obvious that they could not hold together long as the raiding party surpassed them in numbers and determination. Anticipating the collapse of the line, Caesar, who was watching from Antonia, came to the rescue with his picked horsemen. The Jews broke before their onset, and when the front rank men fell, the rest withdrew. But whenever the Romans gave ground, they whipped round and pressed them hard. When the Romans turned about, they retreated again, till at about 11 o'clock they were overpowered and shut up in the inner temple. Titus retired to Antonia, intending to Titus retired to Antonia, intending at stand to next day to launch a full-scale attack and surround the sanctuary completely. It had, however, been condemned to the flames by God long ago. By the turning of time's wheel, the fated day had now come, the 10th of Lus, the day which centuries before had seen it burnt by the king of Babylon. But it was the Jews themselves who caused and started this conflagration. When Titus had retired, the partisans remained quiet for a time, then again attacked the Romans, the garrison of the sanctuary clashing with those who were putting out the fire in the inner temple, and who routed the Jews and chased them as far as the sanctuary. Now, understand that that Donald Trump, as a land baron and land developer, and someone who is in a few initiations, if you know what I mean, and is one of the rabbinical bloodlines, House of Orange, one of the 13 bloodlines. However, I believe his bloodline is an Arctic people, which have a slightly different relationship, which is where the contention comes in, because as the Bach Saga explains to us, which I also explained involves Draco, Reptilian, Anunnaki, Elohim, yada, 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 that when the three Arctic races came on the scene, it created an interesting Game of Thrones paradigm where basically the Carpathian white man, which represents all three because they came into the Carpathian Mountains and then split from there. That he wants to see the temple built. He wants to help them get that temple built. And there's a large portion of the Sunni world, because I believe this is why the Saudis like him and stuff, of the Sunni world that's interested in a reasonable and rational deal about that, where somehow you've got the dual nature of that holy site not being profaned or whatever by the other, right? That's kind of like the big issue, because of how that spot was deliberately selected for the mythology of the creation of Muslims, of Islam. That it would be a core wound point in the Earth Soul energy grid. All right, I'm feeling woo. I'm feeling woozy today. So I'm giving you a couple of vague accuracies, which is an oxymoron. Now I've given you some double speak, trying to spread this over a slice of very wide bread. Let's get back to the book. Then one of the routed the Jews and chased them as far as the sanctuary. Then one of the soldiers, without waiting for orders and without a qualm for the terrible consequences of his actions, but urged on by some unseen force, snatched up a blazing piece of wood and, climbing on another soldier's back, hurled the brand through a golden aperture, giving access on the north side to the chambers built round the sanctuary. It wouldn't shock me if something personal that he's not talking about happened. Like maybe his buddy that maybe was kind of a bathhouse buddy, if you know what I mean. Maybe he like died recently, and maybe he saw somebody that he thinks looks like the guy who did it, or is allies to a specific group of them that work together or something like that, you know, some gang by some name or something. And so for him, it's personal. For him, he didn't care, right? You know, because the man he loved is dead. It could be that kind of a story. So as the flames shot into the air, the Jews sent up a cry that matched the calamity and dashed to the rescue, with no thought now of saving their lives or husbanding their strength. For that which hitherto they had guarded so devotedly was disappearing before their eyes. A runner brought the news to Titus as he was resting in his tent after the battle. He leapt up as he was and ran to the sanctuary to extinguish the blaze. His whole staff panted after him. Remember, guys, there's no water hoses, right? This is bad news bears. This is bad news bears. The kindling has been lit, followed by the excited legions with all the shouting and confusion, inseparable from the disorganized rush of an immense army. Caesar shouted and waved to the combatants to put out the fire, but his shouts were unheard as their ears were deafened with a greater din, and his hand signals went unheeded amidst the distractions of battle and bloodshed. As the legions charged in, neither persuasion nor threat could check their impetus? It's like impetus, so right, impetusity. Passion alone was in command. Passion alone? I thought all the soldiers were like down with like saving the temple. You know, and definitely like something's going on. Somebody had a mean Mr. Mustache moment, and this is a very Loki thing, right? Like, this guy, just blind passion. He let the mistletoe fly, right? It's just like, that's the mistletoe, right? Here we are. This temple is Balder. This is the soul of Israel. Crowded together round the entrances, many were trampled by their friends. Many fell among the still hot and smoking ruins of the colonnades, and died as miserably as the defeated. As they neared the sanctuary, they pretended not even to hear Caesar's commands and urged the men in front to throw in more firebrands. See, and now they're all blind gods, right? The blind god has taken all of them, right? There's something going on here, right? This isn't like just, why the fuck would all the Romans just lose their fucking minds? And stop with the orders. You know, like this frustration. There must have been a tremendous amount of fucking disagreement with the high command. There must have been something in the logistics that was fucking stupid, and it was getting people pissed because of how hard they're fucking fighting. They don't want these fucking like mongoloid. They don't want to die. They don't want to die in a battle like to these guys. Like they're the most, like, this is like, they're not the best soldiers. The best soldiers fucking surrendered or died already. These guys are fucking to the 9 wins. And these guys are crazy. They're just fucking crazy. They're crazy and they're not completely unfit. And they know the place better and have, their own lives that they've schemed before and are part of some, this is gang, like this is the setup. Josephus is saying that this is what it is, right? And whoever carried this narrative through history, needed to be held accountable for it. Crowded together around the entrances, many were trampled. Because I don't know what the exact truth is. I don't know what people say like I've heard a couple people say it, but I haven't committed it to memory yet. Because I will be looking more and more into the fact-checking of Josephus afterwards, and then I may make a video saying, "Hey, I looked into some stuff, some claims made in the book after I read it, and I just want to talk a little bit about it, and that'll be maybe a one-off episode that'll get thrown on the playlist." Many fell among the still hot and smoking ruins of the colonnades and died as miserably as the defeated. As they neared the sanctuary, they pretended not even to hear Caesar's commands and urged the men in front to throw in more firebrands. The partisans were no longer in a position to help. Everywhere was slaughter and flight. Most of the victims were peaceful citizens, weak and unarmed, butchered wherever they were caught. Around the altar, the heap of corpses grew higher and higher, while down the sanctuary steps poured a river of blood and bodies of those killed. At the top, slithered to the bottom. Today's ICE protesters have no idea how fucking spoiled they are. No idea. I mean, you can just go back to the 1960s. You have no fucking idea how spoiled you are. How much we really don't want to... how much we're not trying to harm. And it's a lot of people that are going wild. They're wiling out on all... they're wiling out on both sides. My assumption is Romans on their last nerves, perhaps being instigated by persons of anti-Semitic intent. I don't know. Or perhaps this is the birth of anti-Semitism. Somebody who just one day said, fuck it. Fuck these people. Wouldn't shock me. Because the whole plan is ruined. The whole plan is ruined. The events have now happened. Loki's plot is going to succeed. Okay, where was I? I think it was up here somewhere. So realizing there was still time to save the glorious edifice, Titus dashed out and by personal efforts strove to persuade his men to put out the fire, instructing Liberalius, a centurion of his bodyguard of spearmen, to lay his staff across the shoulders of any who disobeyed. But their respect for Caesar and their fear of the centurion's staff were powerless against their fury, their detestation of the Jews, and an uncontrollable lust for battle. Most of them, again, were spurred on by the expectation of loot, being convinced that the interior was bursting with money and seeing that everything outside was of gold. All right, I find these guys are supposed to be loyal to the emperor. They're supposed to, supposed to be following orders and shit. Unless the emperor's in on this, I mean, this is probably too many people to punish in the proper Roman way, right? It's just if you've got whole legions of people that are just literally fuck this, it's basically telling Rome, what are you gonna do? Fucking come on. There's fucking 6,000 of us or something here, whatever their fucking numbers are right now. You're gonna fucking order us all executed? You know, it's just like we're ready to fucking die honorably, unlike these fucking chodes. Right? That's probably what's going through some of their minds. It can't just be this. It can't just be the promise of loot. These guys get paid handsomely. There's other lootings. It can't be that. Like, where would these Romans have come from? These Romans are supposed to have certain values, which does involve looting. I'm not fucking pretending that it doesn't. But also, if ordered not to loot, they don't loot. Because they're all in agreement in helping the chain of command. Because there's faith in the chain of command. Why is the faith lost? Because they're probably fucking finished with fucking dealing with this. They've never had to fucking, like, take a city this way before. They've never had to conquer a holy site this way before. They've never seen people treat their own holy site this way before. Why wouldn't you say fuck it when you're the fucking one paying the price for the emperor's fucking glory? And someone's going to exploit that feeling and that attitude. And Loki moves through whoever exploited that, whatever hidden hand, which would be possibly a contending rabbi or perhaps part of a revolt against the rabbis by people that have no affiliation to the rabbis other than the unfortunate long chain of familial ties, as the Bach saga explains how we are as a family. But also, the Jews as the chosen people in this story, in this mythology, this history, they're not like, there's outsiders are in their genetics. Because those rabbis started making kingmakers and queenmakers with some of these extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial empires and the various heads of their species in the very early hybridization programs. This is all the stuff that was going on at the end of the high-tech Atlantean period, whichever period of time that is precisely. Because because effectively, the book of Genesis is covering actually 3 ages of man. It is covering a pure mythology of the beginning, which is which is a little bit closer to accurate to the Bach saga of things on the mytho-historical level. And then that's just chapter 1. It's an overview. It's a gross oversimplification of perhaps a couple million years. And then Genesis 2 through Genesis 6 is another continuity of time. And then you have Genesis 7 to the end of Genesis, where we start getting into recordable history. Okay. But they were forestalled by the one of those who had gone in. And by the way, Genesis chapter 2 is your tell of the alien hybridization program through the Elohim. Not even Yahweh. Yahweh is not even the boss in this matter. It's just the Elohim as a council decision. And you see that very carefully, that the Elohim choose an entity, Yahweh, and he is the Lord of the earth. Which then gets into various parallels with the allegories of Gnosticism, which are also spun to make you believe there is no trap outside of the Elohim, because the Elohim are still involved in your reality when they are a hijacking of your ontology. They are not your reality. They are a parallel psyche in which you filter the world, which keeps you on the Ouroboros consuming yourself instead of reaching your personal Atman. But they were forestalled by one of those who had gone in. He, when Caesar dashed out to restrain his men, pushed a firebrand into the hinges of the gate. Then, from within, a flame suddenly shot up. Caesar and his staff withdrew, and those outside were free to start what fires they liked. Thus the sanctuary, in defiance of Caesar's wishes, was set on fire. Grief might well be bitter for the destruction of the most wonderful edifice ever seen or heard of, both for its size and construction and for the lavish perfection of detail. And by the way, how is it that these fucking hardcore fires can burn down this temple, but their best battering rams in the entire empire can't break down the fucking gate? You know, because this thing was made of fucking stone. You know, like, this temple, there's nothing really standing, right? And I guess, like, they say that basically the bones of the temple were picked at to build their new homes and things, you know? So, like, they scavenged the temple after that. So anyway. I mean, one could call this an inside job. Another tower. This is a tower moment. You could do a tarot card on just the temple burning. Okay, cycle. Did I just hit the page? I did. Glory to Holy Place. Yet, we find the real comfort in the thought that fate is inexorable, not only towards living beings, but also towards buildings and sites. We may wonder, too, at the exactness of the cycle of fate. She kept, as I said, to the very month and day which centuries before had seen the sanctuary burnt by the Babylonians. From its first foundation of King Solomon to its present destruction, which occurred in the second year of Vespasian's reign, was a period of 1130 years, 7 months, 15 days. From its rebuilding in the second year of King Cyrus, for which Haggai was responsible, to its capture under Vespasian, 639 years, 45, which reduces to 9 days. Interesting. That's interesting. I'm assuming that numerology checks out. He's using, they translated with the old calendar, so this should check out. Which, if they're using the old calendar, 7 months might be 210 days, I would say. And I don't have time to do the numerology on 1130. Maybe if the next song gives me enough time as I'm refreshing myself. While the sanctuary was burning, looting went on right and left, and all who were caught were put to the sword. There was no pity for age, no regard for rank, so soldiers were also being killed by others. But like soldiers that were trying to keep the order together were killing the soldiers that were looting. So that's also going on. Laymen and priests alike were butchered. Every class was held in the iron embrace of war. whether they defended themselves or cried for mercy. Through the roar of the flames as they swept relentlessly on could be heard the groans of the falling. Such were the height of the hill and the vastness of the blazing edifice that the entire city seemed to be on fire. While as for the noise, nothing could be imagined more shattering or more horrifying. There was the war cry of the Roman legions as they converged, the yells of the partisans encircled with fire and sword, the panic flight into the arms of the enemy of the people cut off above, their shrieks as the end approached, the cries from the hill were answered from the crowded streets, and now many who were wasted with hunger and beyond speech, when they saw the sanctuary in flames, found strength to moan and wail. Back from Perea and the mountains round about came the echo in a thunderous bass. Yet, more terrible than the din were the sights that met the eye. Oh, let me get this annotation. So, for all their apparent accuracy, these figures are considerably out. The second should be 589 years, and the first approximately 1041. Now that's interesting, right? So he's saying that the years are wrong here. That changes the numerology considerably. And such an event, I wouldn't be shocked if the secrets of history would make the esoteric number true. Just like London had to burn in 1666, so the worshipful fuelers, who are going to be related to power player Jews in this conflict, the numerology and the significances always line up to things. All right. Yet more terrible than the din were the sights that met the eye. The Temple Hill, enveloped in flames from top to bottom, appeared to be boiling up from its very roots. Yet the sea of flame was nothing to the ocean of blood, or the companies of killers to the armies of killed. Nowhere could the ground be seen between the corpses, and the soldiers climbed over heaps of bodies as they chased the fugitives. The partisan horde pushed the Romans back, and by a violent struggle burst through into the outer temple, from there into the city. The few surviving members of the public taking refuge on the outer colonnade. Some of the priests at first tore up from the sanctuary the spikes with their lead sockets and threw them at the Romans. Then, as they were no better off and the flames were leaping towards them, they retired to the wall, which was 12 feet wide, and stayed there. However, two men of note, in a position either to save their lives by going over to the Romans or to face with the others whatever came their way, threw themselves into the fire and were burnt to ashes with the sanctuary. Myrus, son of Belgus, and Joseph, son of Delaeus. The Romans, judging it useless to spare the outbuilding, now that the sanctuary was in flames, set fire to them all. What remained of the colonnades and all the gates except two, one on the east end, the other on the south, both of which they later demolished. They also burnt the treasuries, which housed huge sums of money, huge quantities of clothing, and other precious things. Here, in fact, all the wealth of the Jews was piled up, for the rich had dismantled their houses and brought the contents here for safekeeping. Right, and you know, like this is what the Nazis did, but this is also what conquerors do, right? Like, this is like every empire does this. They next came to the last surviving colonnade of the outer temple. On this, women and children and a mixed crowd of citizens had found a refuge, 6,000 in all, before Caesar would reach a decision about them or instruct his officers. The soldiers, carried away by their fury, fired the colonnade from below. As a result, some flung themselves out of the flames to their death, others perished in the blaze. Of that vast number, there escaped not one. Their destruction was due to a false prophet who that very day had declared to the people in the city that God commanded them to go up into the temple to receive the signs of their deliverance. A number of hireling prophets had been put up in recent days by the party chiefs to deceive the people by exhorting them to await help from God, and so reduce the number of deserters and buoy up with hope those who were above fear and anxiety. Man is readily persuaded in adversity when the deceiver actually promises deliverance from the miseries that envelop him. Then the sufferer becomes the willing slave of hope. So it was that the unhappy people were beguiled at that stage by cheats and false messengers of God, while the unmistakable portents that foreshadowed the coming desolation they treated with indifference and incredulity, disregarding God's warnings as if they were moonstruck. Blind and senseless. So moonstruck had lunacy, Fenrir taking over the psyche. First, a star stood over the city, very like a broadsword and a comet that remained a whole year. Then, before the revolt and the movement to war, while the people were assembling for the feast of unleavened bread on the 8th of Xanthikos at 3 in the morning, so bright a light shone round the altar and the sanctuary that it might have been midday. This lasted half an hour. The inexperienced took it for a good omen, but the sacred scribes at once gave an interpretation which the event proved right. During the same feast, a cow brought by someone to be sacrificed gave birth to a lamb in the middle of the temple courts. What? Okay, somebody's obviously an idiot. During the same feast, a cow brought by someone to be sacrificed gave birth to a lamb in the middle of the... Why would you translate it like, do cow? Calf. Cows, in English we use the word calf. How is a cow birthing a lamb? That doesn't make sense. So, was it a lamb birthing a baby lamb, or was it a cow birthing a calf? Or did somebody stuff a lamb up a cow and it shat it out? You fucking tell me. Temple courts, while at midnight it was observed that the east gate of the inner sanctuary had opened of its own accord, a gate made of bronze and so solid that every evening 20 strong men were required to shut it, fastened with iron-bound bars and secured by bolts which were lowered a long way into a threshold fashioned from a single slab of stone. We're at 349. I'm actually over the page now. So, I want to take my break desperately. I got carried away, and I didn't think I was going to get carried away with how much I was just like on tangents. This was it took me an hour. It took me just about an hour to go through 5 fucking pages. Wild. Okay. So, let's get a little bit more cryptopsy in here. There might be an ad. Give me a second. Perfect. I think the music is tonally appropriate for the content. All right, let's jump back in. Man, I gave you guys better part of a day to come hang out with me live, and no one could make it live today. Such a bummer. All right. The temple guards ran with the news to the captain, who came up and by a great effort managed to shut it. This, like the other, seemed to the laity to be the best of omens. Had not God opened to them the gate of happiness, but the learned perceived that the security of the sanctuary was dissolving of its own accord, and that the opening of the gate was a gift to the enemy, and they admitted in their hearts that the sign was a portent of desolation. A few days after the feast, on the 21st of Artemisius, a supernatural apparition was seen. Ooh. Too amazing to be believed. What I have to relate would, I suppose, have been dismissed as an invention had it not been vouched for by eyewitnesses and followed by disasters that bore out the signs. Ooh, I'm intrigued. What is this? Have I ever heard this as a footnote somewhere before? Let me hear it. Let me hear it. Before sunset, there was seen in the sky over the whole country chariots and regiments in arms speeding through the clouds and encircling the town. Here we are, again at the Feast of Pentecost, when the priests had gone into the inner temple at night to perform the usual ceremonies. They declared that they were aware first of the violent movement and a loud crash, then a concerted cry, "Let us go hence." An incident more alarming still had occurred 4 years before the war, at a time of exceptional peace and prosperity for the city. One Jeshua, there was a slight power fluctuation. You probably saw that. I'm going to kill the air conditioner for now, because it's probably it's 9, people should be turning their ACs down, not up. It's dark now. The sun's not cooking us. It's probably a lovely night. I'm probably going to get some fresh air in another hour when I'm off the air. But anyway, again at the Feast of Pentecost, when the priests had gone into the temple at night to perform the usual ceremonies, they declared that they were aware first of a violent movement and a loud crash, then a concerted cry, "Let us go hence." An incident more alarming still occurred 4 years before. Okay, let me jump ahead. Okay, one Jeshua, son of Ananias. Here's another Ananias, Jeshua, Ananias. These names are dime a dozen, guys. Dime a dozen. A very ordinary yokel. Come on, yokel. Give me a better word than that to translate from, poor simpleton or whatever the fuck you're trying to characterize him as. Come to the feast at which every Jew is expected to set up a tabernacle for God. As he stood in the temple, he suddenly began to shout, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and the sanctuary, a voice against bridegrooms and brides, a voice against the whole people. Day and night he uttered this cry as he went through all the streets. Some of the more prominent citizens, very annoyed at these ominous words, laid hold of the fellow and beat him savagely. Without saying a word in his own defense or for the private information of his persecutors, he persisted in shouting the same warning as before. The Jewish authorities, rightly concluding that some supernatural force was responsible for the man's behavior, took him before the Roman procurator. There, though scourged till his flesh hung in ribbons, he neither begged for mercy nor shed a tear, but lowered his voice to the most mournful of tones and answered every blow with, "Woe to Jerusalem." Interesting. So, That's interesting. And his name's Jeshua. And he's getting whipped like Jesus. When Albinus, for that was the procurator's name, demanded to know who he was, where he came from, and why he uttered such cries, he made no reply whatever to the questions, but endlessly repeated his lament over the city, till Albinus decided he was a madman and released him. All the time till the war broke out, he never approached another citizen or was seen in conversation, but daily, as if he had learned a prayer by heart, he recited his lament. Woe to Jerusalem! Those who daily cursed him, he never cursed. Those who gave him food, he never thanked. His only response to anyone was that dismal foreboding. His voice was heard most of all at the feasts. For 7 years and 5 months he went on ceaselessly, his voice as strong as ever, his vigor unabated. 7 years. But they went back 4 years, right? An incident more alarming happened 4 years before the war at a time of exceptional peace. So how could he go on for 7 years if we're only 4 years back? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway. Till the siege, after seeing the fulfillment of his foreboding, he was silenced. Maybe what they're saying is that 4 years ago is when the whipping happened, and so he actually started doing it 7 years ago. Either way, that's not made clear, and one of these statements is a lie. He was going round on the wall, uttering his piercing cry. Woe again to the city, the people in the sanctuary, and he added a last word. Woe to me also, a stone shot from an engine struck him, killing him instantly. Thus he uttered those same forebodings to the very end. All right, that sounds like a little bit of poetic justice. His last words was woe unto me, and then he got hit by an engine. Like, alrighty. Anyway, anyone who ponders these things will find that God cares for mankind and in all possible ways foreshows to his people the means of salvation, and that it is through folly and evils of their own choosing that they come to destruction. Thus the Jews, after pulling down Antonia, made the temple square in spite of the warnings in their prophetic books that when the temple became a square, the city and sanctuary would fall. But their chief inducement to go to war was an equivocal oracle, also found in their sacred writings, announcing that at the same time a man from their country would become monarch of the whole world. This they took to mean the triumph of their own race, and many of their scholars were wildly out in their interpretation. In fact, the oracle pointed to the accession of Vespasian, for it was in Judea he was proclaimed emperor. But it is not possible for men to escape from the fate even if they see it coming. The Jews interpreted some of the prophecies to suit themselves and laughed the others off, till by the fall of their city and their own destruction their folly stood revealed. As the partisans had fled into the city and the flames were consuming the sanctuary itself and all its surroundings, the Romans brought their standards into the temple area and, erecting them opposite the east gate, sacrificed to them there. With the thunderous acclamations, hailed Titus as imperator. So laden with plunder was every single soldier that all over Syria the value of gold was reduced by half. So hold on, I thought they were punishing the plunderers. Or the plundering Romans were the successful ones, or they just didn't, or was it man of rank? They must have meant man of rank amongst the rioting Jews, I guess. I thought that I thought he was listing everything. I guess he was just mentioning who the Jews were that were getting slaughtered, because yeah, well, we'll see. Let's see if there's any consequences for any of this for anybody. Okay. With the priests holding out on the sanctuary wall was a lad parched with thirst. He begged the Roman guards to give him safe conduct, openly admitting his thirst. They felt sorry that a mere child should be suffering, so, and granted the safe conduct, he came down, drank what he needed, filled the vessel he had brought with water, and dashed off full speed to his friends aloft. He was far too quick for the guards, who swore at him for breaking his word. But he retorted that he had done no such thing, for the agreement had not been that he should stay with them, but only that he should come down and get some water. You see, this is why you got to know law and how to talk. Like this kid was clever. This kid knew what he was doing, right? He was able to prove that the karma would be on them because they agreed that he is not under arrest. That was exactly what he had done. So how had he broken his word? Such sharp practice in one so young astounded the victims of his trickery. However, after 4 days, the starving priests came down and were taken by the guards to Titus, whom they begged to spare their lives. He replied that the time for pardon was past, that the one thing that would have justified their being spared had gone, and that the duty of priests was to perish with their sanctuary. Then he pronounced sentence of death. The partisans and thief chiefs, beaten in the war all ways and shut... The partisans and their chiefs, beaten in the war all ways and shut in by a wall that left them no possibility of escape, invited Titus to a parley. Such was his natural kindness that he was eager to save the town, and urged by his friends, who concluded that the terrorists had at last come to their senses. See, here they're being referred to as terrorists, right? And I've already, all throughout this book, made comparisons to the wildly outrageous behavior of the left in this country, comparable from our firsthand experience of them, to this precedent in history. And like I said earlier, this is unusual precedent. Like the Romans have just never had to deal with this before. And they didn't understand, they just don't fucking understand why we don't just do the thing that we do as Romans. And so that's what they decided to do, because it was all getting fucking ridiculous. They weren't interested in this goodwill thing anymore. That those appearances don't mean anything to them, and these people will never be a threat to them. And nobody will care enough about them to fucking bother anybody else to fight us on their behalf. Right? Because the conduct of the leadership in doing this invasion was infuriating. It shouldn't have done this much damage to their own. And, you want to keep that faith with your military apparatus. So we'll see how consequences go from this point forth. For here above the gymnasium there were gates and a bridge linked the temple with the upper city. This now separated the party chiefs from Caesar. On either side stood a dense crowd, Jews round Simon and John on tiptoe with hope of pardon. Romans eager to see how Titus would receive their appeal. Titus called on his men to control their fury and their weapon, and placing his interpreter by his side, exercised the victor's privilege and spoke first. Are you satisfied now, gentlemen, with the sufferings of your country? You who in utter disregard of our strength and your weakness, have, through your reckless impetuosity and madness, destroyed your people, your city, and your temple, and richly deserve the destruction that is coming to yourselves. You, who, from the moment Pompey's forces crushed you, have never stopped rebelling, and now have made open war on Rome. Do you rely on numbers? Why a tiny fraction of the Roman army suffice to deal with you? Well, then, on the trustworthiness of your allies, and which of the nations outside our empire was going to prefer Jews to Romans? Or on your wonderful physique, yet you know that the Germans are our slaves. Thank you. I am now justified. That the Germans are our slaves on the strength of your walls. Right? So it's just like our slaves that we have slaves that will fight for us, and they're stronger than you as free men, allegedly. Anyway, what wall could be a better obstacle than the open sea that is the bulwark of Britain? But Britain was brought to her knees by the arms of Rome. On your invincible determination and the wiles of your generals, yet you know that even Carthage was overwhelmed. There is only one answer. You were incited against the Romans by Roman kindness. First we gave you the land to occupy and set over you kings of your own race. So here we're getting a whole... So here, just so that this is making a big claim, right? So this is making a claim of historical context that their entire little fucking kingdom is a fucking product of Roman privilege. That Rome gives you the privilege of having a kingdom within our thing. This is the UN in Israel. Okay? This is the UN in Israel. And there are too many innocent Jews in Israel that got nothing to do with the rabbis of the dark brotherhoods and sisterhoods who are not Israelis, although they may have that on paper, but are they transcend nations because they go back to what was originally supposed to be holding the harmonious order of our people through the turmoil of being cut off from the mother-father family at the top of our entire race of humanity. And then basically defecting against them. And then it's not entirely clear if either one of these parties' intentions are good for all of us as a whole, but also all of us, very few people break free in the mind, like me and like you, who has been listening to my work for a long time, or have just stumbled across it, but have been doing all sorts of other things, and you know how it is. So, this is quite the statement. You were incited against the Romans by Roman kindness. First we gave you the land to occupy and set over your kings of your own race. Then we upheld the laws of your fathers and allowed you complete control of your internal and external affairs. Just like we do for Israel now. Just like we assume the state of the global relationship with the state of Israel is today. Nothing's fucking changed in 2,000 plus years. We permitted you to raise taxes for God and to collect offerings, and we neither discouraged nor interfered with those who brought them. Right? So this is also like Rome treated the state of Israel different anyway. Like, they never conquered the state of Israel. They invented it as a gift for them. Right? And so you have to ask yourself, how those negotiations go down. Where'd that happen? Who met who first? Who was led to who first? So that you could grow richer to our detriment and prepare at our expense to make war on us. This is every anti-Zionist's fucking rhetoric here. This is anti-Zionist grievance as the status quo of Western civilization right now. You know, this is literally Emperor Vespasian's attitude. The Caesar's attitude for this exploitation. And all of this is public whatever, because there's shit going, there's background of reality. This is the public consumption side of it. There's something unspoken that was unfulfilled on their side of the bargain, which also led to their fucking issues of being this to Rome, right? That's what like, I don't know where the world stands right now, right? Like, right now we live where it seems like most of the Western empires, you know, anywhere that's a Christian part of the world, they just don't care what the Jews in Israel do. They don't care what Israelis do. It's really a big aspect of their thing. You know, this is why, you know, Ted Cruz is letting the entire fucking internet know he's got a blind spot for that narrative about blessing Israel. Right? The Romans don't have this fucking blind spot. Right? How long did it take for the Jews to get this level of a favorable world again? What did we forget when Rome fell? Right? And the difference being that we have an entire world of problems that works in a weird juxtaposition to the standards for Israel. And so you can't let somebody demagogue you with anti-Semitic this and that. Because you can't be, your motivation, your psyche can't be an anti-Semitic psyche if it has nothing to do with Jews in a collective sense of just their baseline identity. It has to be behavior, like ISIS. ISIS is a choice to be a monster, right? To do horrible things, to war against your own people, yada, 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 right? So you become anti-ISIS. And maybe everybody in ISIS is perhaps a Syrian, let's say, right? Where ISIS was the most big of a deal. So that makes you anti-Syrian. Right? It's just like, you're against ISIS, you against Syrians? Right? You know, because most of ISIS is Syrian. But you see, that doesn't make any sense. And the only thing that they want you to be afraid of being is anti-Semitic. They want you to be afraid of being called that. They want you to believe that they can out-convince their audience and your audience that you are a monster because you understand fair judgment, right and wrong, sitting and analyzing a situation carefully, weighing both sides, asking yourself, who is people of better character, because this isn't about law. This is about international relations and things of this nature. So yeah, I mean, Israel is basically a Roman colony, right? Just like modern Israel is basically a Western military base with a supporting population, and that's all it is. They don't have enough room to not have everything in the Israeli military-industrial complex within Israel, because they have made such a big deal about the fact that Shia Muslims more particularly hate them than the Sunnis, and so you got Iran, and anywhere where there's Shia, ideologically more aligned to Iranian ideals, and then you've just got the consistent bullshit against the Palestinians. And this is that monstrous, inhumane argument, right? So, the Romans have needed to exploit Israel to their liking to serve the empire's needs. And then in exchange for that, they get to exist doing what they're doing. But at the same time, they keep pushing it, and they don't care about human beings, and without the human beings, you don't have anything, and you're because perhaps this is part of where Rome is getting these attitude shifts and saying, we got to start thinking of a system that funnels everything into one fucking God and one fucking voice for that God. And that'll keep these guys under control and all these guys under control. If we can structure our workings this way. And thus, they invented Christianity and then later Islam. So that you could go richer to our detriment and prepare at our expense to make war on us. Then, enjoying such advantages, you flung your abundance at the heads of those who furnished it, and like beasts you bit the hand that fed you. No doubt you despise Nero for his idleness, and like Lycians or Sprains, you remained quiescent but malignant for a time. Quiescent? Quiescent? Is that like quiet? Lycians or sprained, you may question malignant for a time. Is lesions like lesions? Like skin lesions? And sprains, like a sprained ankle? Because I don't think that these are not uppercase words. These are not proper names, I would assume. So I think lesions and sprains. So physical ailments. So when a more serious illness broke out, you came out into the open and let your limitless ambition grow into insolent presumption. My father came into the country, not to punish you for what you did in cestious time, but to caution you. If he had come to put an end to the nation, the right thing would have been to go straight to the root of your strength and sack this city at once. In actual fact, he ravaged Galilee and the outlying districts, giving you time to come to your senses. But you took generosity for weakness, and our gentleness only served to increase your audacity. When Nero died, you sank to the lowest level of depravity. You took advantage of our difficulties at home, and when my father and I had gone away to Egypt, you jumped at the chance to prepare for war and shamelessly created difficulties now that we were emperors, though when we were generals, you had found us so considerate. Yeah, this is talking about, this is why obviously the year for emperors matters so much. It's funny how Josephus doesn't like retrospectively mentioned, at a certain point that this fateful year we would go through 4 emperors, and this would give and such and such kings tried to exploit this but failed miserably. Fucking crazy, right? And all of this shows that they prove they're now worthy of the nation that they were loaned. They're on a loaned nation, and this is and this is calling in the debt. I forget. There's a name on Wall Street for this. When the bank asks for the debt to come in or whatever. But anyway, when the whole empire had to come to us for protection, when all its inhabitants were enjoying the blessings of peace, and countries outside were sending embassies to congratulate us, once again the Jews rose against us. You sent embassies beyond the Euphrates to stir up a revolt. You rebuilt your city walls. There were faction fights, rival party chiefs, civil war, just what we should expect from men so depraved. I came to the city bearing somber injunctions, which it had pained my father to give. When I heard that the citizens were peace-minded, I was delighted. You others I begged to desist before hostilities began. Right? Yeah, peace-minded, right? This is the whole thing of this is the left, which is very, very peaceful, but not intelligent enough to keep the peace when they need to debate their differences, right? So there's a whole slew of problems that these guys have, and they're just delusional. Because they know other places with people that have similar problems, but they're not delusional, right? Everything is very special instance here. And there's the question of why the Romans would do this kindness for them so much anyway, right? And, it's just nuts, right? Because they want to keep, because they want to keep themselves together. They want to be able to live in a certain place, be able to carry on their traditions, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And ultimately, it's because of the fact that they said, oh, these guys, they know how to make money. That's all ultimately what it is. These guys are good for mercantilism, right? So we'll set up their little kingdom. We'll give them what they want. We'll let them have these wealthy fucking businesses out of the whole thing and give them a nice boosty little economy. And then we get to fucking tax that for the empire's needs. Oh, this is fantastic. But they were coming up short on their protection money and wouldn't agree to the change in the deal, even though there was no real debate about the change in the deal. There is you bringing up grievances and good luck making a good argument, or at the very least saying, give us this in return for how much you're taking from us, because you do care about us not starving and stuff, right? So we can keep working for you and keep doing the thing that you said you liked seeing. You said you liked Israel. You said you were happy to see how we did. We're struggling a little bit right now, but come on, it's us. Look, like we own your theaters. Come on, we entertain you. Aren't we funny? But anyway, for many prisoners I showed pity. The warmongers I punished with torture and death. Most unwillingly, I brought engines to bear on the walls. My soldiers, ever thirsting for your blood, I held in leash. After every victory, as if it was a defeat, I appealed to you for an armistice. When I got near the temple, I again deliberately forewent my rights as victor and appealed to you to spare your own holy places and preserves the sanctuary for your own use, offering you freedom to come out and a guarantee of safety, or, if you wished, a chance to fight on other ground. Every proposal you treated with scorn, and your sanctuary you set on fire with your own hands. Right, because I think once the guy threw the stick in there, as it was explained before, they wiled out and they just fucking wrecked everything. Right? They went into a panic, and I think they spread the fire because the Romans were also moving in with the fire, and so they were letting things burn to help them beat the Romans. Right? Even though it still was instigated, it was still like the trigger was pulled by a lone irate soldier, allegedly. But let's face it, he's probably being enabled by a huge portion of the ranks to make such a ballsy move. He would have been enabled by a lot of people, I think. Because it's very, very clear that these guys are less inclined to follow orders in restraint with the way their fucking enemy acts, because there's no trust, because they're wiling out. This is, they're under some sort of chaotic magic. There's a lot of chaos magic screwing with these guys. After all that, you disgusting people, do you now invite me to a conference? What have you to save that can be compared with what has gone? What security do you think you deserve after the loss of your sanctuary? Why, even now, you stand in arms and not even at your last gasp, so much as pretend to be asking for mercy? You poor fools! What are you pinning your faith on? Aren't your people dead? Your sanctuary gone? Your city in my power? Your very lives in my hands? Do you think you will win renown for your courage by putting off death till the last moment? I shall not compete with you in craziness. If you throw down your arms and surrender your persons, I will grant you your lives. Like an easygoing head of a house, I will punish what cannot be cured and spare the rest for my own use. So this they replied, that they could accept no terms from him, as they had sworn never to do this, but they asked leave to go out through the encircling wall with their wives and children, in which case they would go away into the desert and leave the city to him. Titus, furious that men no better than prisoners should put forward demands as if they had defeated him, ordered it to be announced that it was no longer any use their deserting or hoping for terms, as he would spare no one. 1 second. Let me get a count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, okay, 7 pages. Yes. Yeah, alright, this is a good spot. We're going to take the next break. I have to admit, whoever translated all these different speeches did them really well. They're fairly fun to orate. Like, I feel like I'm channeling something in my Roman side when I'm doing this. So, anyway. Hey, what's up, Parsons? They're not? They should be on Rumble. Phoenix and Parsons. Phoenix Enigma is on Rumble. I sometimes listen to them on Rumble, but Rumble's also been kind of like, they've been having some sort of bandwidth struggle with it. There's a consistent refreshing process. It's a little frustrating on Rumble. But they are broadcasting on X. They do have their show running on X. Okay. So let me bleed your ears a little bit more. We got some more cryptopsy for you. That's why we're Yeah, man. I don't listen to Cryptopsy often enough, so I haven't listened to them in a while. You know, this whole album is like this, right? So the whole band's probably like this. And it's like some of this stuff, it, like, wilds out. Like me when I'm trying to be my most visceral, kind of sounds like this. You get a sense of that from my fastest songs on the Zerilath Shreds channel. Oh, and also Parsons, if you get on the Telegram app, there's not only the Phoenix Enigma page on Telegram, there is also the Going Live page, which like I think Alicia Alicia pretty much runs that, right? And so you can have aside conversations about Phoenix Enigma on there, but also it's for notification when going live. Alicia will say that they're live now or they're going live in 5 minutes or something like that. You know, right when they're ready to roll, because you know they're Corey and Alicia, that they're living their lives, and the podcast kind of comes second to taking care of real world, right? You know, which is the consequences of being authentically opposed to the editing and production mandates of the system. Anyway, let's get back to the story. We're gonna do there's 7 pages left, so we're gonna do like 4 pages, or maybe 3.5 pages and 3.5 pages. So they must fight to the last ditch and save themselves in any way they could. From now on, he would insist on all his rights as victor. Then he gave his men leave to turn and sack the city. They did nothing that day, but on the next they fired the muniment office, the citadel, and the council chamber in the area known as Ophel. The fire spread as far as Helena's palace in the center of the citadel, consuming the narrow streets and the houses full of the bodies of those who had died of starvation. They might have 2 Rumble channels. I think they have 2 Rumble channels. Double check on the Phoenix Enigma on Rumble, like search and then see if they have 2 channels. I think they do. I think one's more like for like archive stuff and one's more of the on-running. Something to that effect. Or it might just be a Rumble backup because they don't trust Rumble. On the same day, King Azate's sons and brothers, joined by many prominent citizens, besought Caesar to grant them protection. He, though furious with all the survivors, lived up to his character and received the applicants. For the time being, he kept them all in custody. The king's son and kinsmen he put in chains and later conveyed to Rome to serve as hostages. The partisans made no rush towards the royal palace, which was so solidly built that many had stored their property there. They drove away the Romans, slaughtered the people who had crowded into the building, 84,000 in number, and looted the riches. They also took 2 of the Romans alive, a cavalryman and an infantryman. The infantrymen they butchered and dragged round the city. As if by proxy they were revenging themselves on all the Romans. As the cavalryman said he had something to suggest that might save their lives, he was taken into Simon's presence. But when he got there, he had nothing to say. So was handed over to Ardalus, one of the officers, to be executed. Ardalus tied his hands behind him and blindfolded him, then marched him forward in full view of the Romans with the intention of cutting off his head. But by a sudden movement, the man dashed away to the Roman lines just as the Jew drew his sword. As he made his escape from the enemy, Titus could not very well put him to death, but deciding that he was unfit to be a soldier of Rome, as he had let himself be taken alive, he stripped him of his arms and expelled him from the legion. To a man with any self-respect, a punishment worse than death. So understand some shit, man. Okay, so here we are, there are some stuff, right? Like here's some consequences. But also, now think of the context of the Gospels. The Gospels have always had anti-Semitism in them, right? Because the Jews are painted in such a wretched light in the Gospels, and Saul's in the book of Acts, I think. Well, all the exploits of Saul. Then you've got the argument in the book of Hebrews, which clearly doesn't understand forgiveness through sin. Who doesn't understand, the book of Hebrews straight up says that Jesus' sacrifice is of sufficient blood ritual to be the last sacrifice. This is the argument in the book of Hebrews for Jews for Jesus. That's the cornerstone of the whole fucking gripe. And then you read the Torah, and the manner in which you slaughter a lamb for sin cleansing was nothing like his fucking crucifixion. Nothing like it. A great deal of the New Testament was designed to mock the Jews, and I believe they were designed to mock the Jews because of this. So, has Josephus mischaracterized them? Did this never happen the way that they said that it happened? Was there not the level of crazy in the temple? Because this crazy was everywhere. It was in Herod's time, and Herod basically kept it under control. Like, Herod is like Saddam Hussein over here, right? And that's part of the mind control, right? It's babies and incubators for Saddam Hussein. It's babies and bayonets for the Germans in World War I, right? And the dark motherhood will emotionally manipulate the women into to manipulate the men to go die for these fucking things. And you're just going to get used as a pawn in the furtherance of the suffering you meant to stop. These soldiers had had enough. Because they knew that their mission of protecting this temple within the mission of conquering the city was a fucking futile effort that was going to get more men killed in ways they didn't, against guys they didn't care to fight, in situations they don't care to fucking be in, because they're not idiots. Anyway, the next day the Romans drove the terrorists from the lower city and burnt the whole place as far as Siloam. They were glad enough to see the town destroyed, but got precious little loot, as the whole area had been cleaned out by the partisans before they withdrew to the upper city. These men felt no remorse for the mischief they had done. They boasted as if they were proud of it. When they saw the city burning, they laughed heartily and said they were happily awaiting the end. For as the people were slaughtered, the sanctuary burnt to the ground, and the town blazing, they were leaving nothing to the enemy. Yet to the very last, Josephus never wearied of appealing to them to spare what was left of the city. Though, however, much he might say against their savagery and impiety, however much advice he might give them for their own good, he got nothing but ridicule in return. As they could not very well surrender because of their oath and were unable now to fight the Romans on equal terms, they were like caged animals, so used to killing that they thirsted for blood. They scattered through the outskirts of the city and lay in wait among the ruins for the would-be deserters. Many, in fact, were caught, and as a hunger had left them too weak even to run away, all were butchered and their bodies thrown to the dogs. But any kind of death was more bearable than starvation, so that although they had no hope now of mercy from the Romans, they still fled to them, falling into the murderous hands of the partisans with their eyes open. Not one spot in the whole city was empty. Every single one had its corpse, the victim of hunger or faction. Excuse me. The last hope that bolstered up the party chiefs and their terrorist gangs lay in the underground sewers. If they took refuge in them, they did not expect to be tracked down, and after the final capture of the city and the subsequent departure of the Romans, their intention was to come out and make good their escape. I don't think they understand what's about to happen to Jerusalem. Let's find out. But this was only an idle dream. I'm probably right. They were not fated to escape from either God or the Romans. At the time, however, they had such faith in their bolt holes that they lit more fires than did the Romans. Those who fled from the burning buildings into the sewers, they killed without hesitation and plundered. If they found anyone with food, they snatched it away and swallowed it. Dripping with the wretched man's blood, by now they were actually fighting each other for the loot, and I have little doubt that if capture had not forestalled it, their utter bestiality would have made them get their teeth into the very corpses. The only reason why you'd still care about loot at this point is if you are that psychotic where you think you're going to have your treasure in a little corner hole you dug out in the sewer system. Because you think you're still going to be able to run a black market. Owing to the steep approach on every side, it was not feasible to master the upper city without platforms. You know, the question is with all these particular, like, all this stuff was like, it must have been just large enough of a partisan faction with so many fucking internal problems with there being anybody of soldier worth among these people that they couldn't even handle the horrid element within their own. You know, seriously, it's like, who's the Jew here, right? You know, when I think about Palestine and Israel, I mean, Palestine is kind of semi in the same situation, right? Because I've been making this particular argument about Palestine. It's that they had a chance to do something for themselves as the semi-free area that they were. And they trusted the League of Nations after the Ottoman Empire fell. They trusted the League of Nations that they would be fine. And they didn't struggle much to develop themselves. At least we didn't care about their struggles at all. To the point where, I'm certainly like, I think they had a couple of struggles, but I mean like the struggle of just like, hey, we want to be more than a village now. We kind of realize that if we want to keep our way of life, we kind of have to be a little bit different and have a population that maybe has a few strong, disciplined, intelligent men and women, doing all sorts of things and getting us up on a civilization so we can have enough soul strength within our tribes to keep up with the threats of the world, right? This is the path of Hagalaz, right? This is the second 8, right? In your soul development, which happens in micro and macrocosms, individuals and collectives, you go through these kinds of troubles, these trials, and it defines your character. It marks a shifting of an age, which will usually have dramatic effects within a generation. Japan, after the fire bombings that was blamed on the nuclear bombs, was so traumatized and in a certain state of surrender agreement with the Allied powers, that they really cut down on basically their military nationalistic ideals, right? Like we barred them from having a military; they would have to be protected by us. And over time, we've let loose on that as we've looked at the cost of things and changed our values and built a new kind of relationship. And then there's always the independence of Korea and China at their strengths, that they felt confident that it wasn't a big deal to let them defend themselves. And by and large, that's turned out pretty good, right? I hear that the Japanese are now having population problems, right? Because the entire work ethic of life over there is really crushing their working class, and it's really discouraging men from starting families. And I feel that here in ways that I hate, right? And I guarantee you that's coming from the men that are otakus, just like the otaku men over here. I'm an otaku. I'm a bit affected by it, which is why I'm in my station at this point, right? And it's just part of my healing process after all of this damage I did to myself, protecting myself from a scarier world I didn't understand, which is funny, kind of makes you feel like you're under the same force as the conquerors are putting on our alleged enemies. And that's cognitive dissonance. And if you can't fucking see that, right? And usually we're rational people saying how have their attitudes changed since the last course of events. Men are history bound, so we think about that a lot more than women, but when we're talking about the current state of affairs and the recent course of events, they definitely remember that. No one's that stupid about situations, right? And they have to keep the propaganda in perpetuity in order to feed their machine, because they need to emotionally manipulate the women who, without the mind of the man helping them so they can be relaxed into their right brain, they are going to forget about how they got dragged through this the last time. Right? Because that's a unique thing. Men have pursuits that they fail at and go into loops. Women have a way of their world that collapses on them, and then they don't handle that problem correctly, and it keeps them on a loop. And those are our Ouroboroses, right? This is my last Ouroboros in the way of the rest of my life right now. Okay? So whatever force put the Jews in this state of their character, which is similar to a state of character I could have seen myself easily being with the friends that I kept and seeing which direction they went. And I still love these guys because their hearts are in the right place. And when you can respect that sometimes you got binary decisions to make and you have to find the true binary to make, and it lands right of the middle too many times, and sometimes a little bit further to the right, and it polarizes your friends in opposite ways, it sucks, because you know that you're shifting, you're drifting, right? They're going down a path that is going to be adversarial to you. And then it makes you think about what level of adversary you want to be to your goddamn friends. So you definitely end up caring to avoid that because it's better for peace, and hopefully the other party feels the same way after parting ways. Sometimes I feel like I've straightened myself out in ways where I can be friends with my old friends, maybe, because I'm better on my posture and my terms and other things that rock about me now that didn't rock about me 4 years ago. But also, there's many ways I'm just still me because, I don't like holding Mr. Stiff. Or even, and sometimes I just don't want to be any kind of restrained at all, because look, it's kind of like being a Vulcan, except you got to do it way more often than once a Vulcan year. All right, but like as a guy holding his posture while keeping his wolves, he's got to go full Krynos, full Guru once in a while, right? And if you can find a safe way to do it once a week, great. Once a month at the best, right? Because your moon fucking needs it. It's either that or you've got a lady with the strength card in her soul, and she'll tame the beast for you. But anyway, owing to the steep approach on every side, it was not feasible to master the upper city without platforms. So on the 12th of Luce, Caesar divided up the work among the troops. It was difficult to transport the timber, since, as mentioned before, all the neighborhood for 11 or 12 miles had been stripped bare for the earlier platforms. The 4 legions raised their work on the west side of the city, opposite the royal palace, while the whole body of allies and the rest of the army worked near the gymnasium, the bridge in Simon's Tower, built during the struggle with John as a stronghold for himself. At this time, the Idumean chiefs at a secret meeting discussed the question of piecemeal surrender and sent 5 men to Titus to implore his protection. All right, finally got some guys coming to their senses. He, hoping that the party chiefs too would give in if they lost the support of the Idumeans, who had made so large a contribution to the war, hesitated at first, but finally granted them their lives and sent the men back. Remember, with the issue of the 8 to whatever thousand words in the Hebrew language, and if these are like the radical guys, they probably like first language Hebrew, right? Like these guys would be speaking the equivalent of simpleton speak. They only have so many fucking words to express themselves, as opposed to these guys spitting Latin. Which is a language which is still growing. It's the largest dead language in the world. We call it a dead language, but then every time we make a scientific discovery, we can find a word for it. And it's a new word, because we understand how to put a couple of Latin syllables together that have their primordial etymological meanings to rationally come up with the right name for a thing. Unless you're being cute and adorable and some idiot lets you name it after your granddaughter. So anyway, which is why they don't let you name it after your granddaughter in the scientific record. That'll be your colloquial record, that it'll be known to the layman not doing science, right? Anyway. And sent 5 men to Titus to implore his. He, hoping that the party chiefs would give in, and lost the support of the Idumeans, who had made such a large contribution to the war, hesitated at first, but finally granted them their lives and sent the men back. But as they got ready to go, Simon saw what was afoot, immediately put to death the 5 who had gone to Titus, seized the chiefs, of whom the most prominent was Jacob son of Sosas, and threw them into prison. On the Idumean rank and file, at a loss without their leaders, he kept a careful eye, posting more efficient sentry groups along the wall. However, the sentries were unable to cope with the deserters. Many as were the killed, far more got away. The Romans received them all. Titus, through kindness of heart, disregarding his earlier proclamation, and the men holding their hands because they were sick of killing and hopeful of gain. For only townsmen were kept back. All the rest were sold along with the women and children, the retail price being very low, as supply was far in excess of demand, in spite of his earlier announcements that no one must desert alone, but must bring his family with him. He nevertheless received such people, but he appointed officers to separate from them anyone deserving punishment. The number sold was enormous. The number of townsmen spared was over 40,000. These were free to go wherever they thought fit. During the same period, a priest named Jeshua, son of Thabuthi, or is that Tabuti? Which sounds like Tahuti. Jeshua, son of Thoth. That's hysterical. That is hysterical. I'm going to have to tell Sethicus about that if you didn't know it already. Obtained from Caesar a sworn guarantee of safety on condition that he should hand over some of the sacred treasures. He came out and handed over from the sanctuary wall 2 lampstands closely resembling those kept in the sanctuary, as well as tables, basins, and cups, all of solid gold and very, very heavy. All right, that's a very rich person. He also handed over the curtains, the vestments of the chief priests with the precious stones, and many other articles required for the temple services. In addition, the temple treasurer, Phineas, when taken prisoner, produced the tunics and girdles of the priests. You know, and by the way, to throw some shade on Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he's the one that signed the the laws into effect that restricted the currency level possession of gold, right? He is the one that killed that before later on Nixon would end the gold standard. And so Americans did this too, but they had done sufficient propaganda on us over the course of the years between Teddy Roosevelt's administration when the Panic of 1908 was invoked. The Panic of 1908, or was it 1901 or something? 1908 had something to do with it. Anyway, when that panic happened, during it was a war of contrition it was a war of attrition between J.P. Morgan and the United States government. All of this to get the central bank into place. After the central bank is in place, that was used as a financial engine for American imperialism with World War I. And then, well, it was not, American imperialism, World War I, because we entered World War I on behalf of the European empires. And we all know about the families that instigated World War I, which is how we got the House of Windsor to make its name the House of Windsor from their German name, because of all of the bad blood on Germany. It's just like, he realized that all the propaganda worked so well that if he didn't hide his German ancestry from the people, that he would get deposed as king. So he changed his name to Windsor as a cover for his successful propaganda campaign to demonize the German nationals, as opposed to what he was, which was a German immigrant. But then again, there were also Germanic Brits going back to the Bronze Age because of Viking expansion, Germanic expansion, during the various conflicts between the British Isles and Eru, Albion and Eru. Phineas, when taken prisoner, produced the tunics and girdles of the priests, a large supply of purple and scarlet kept in store for repairing the great curtain, together with cinnamon in bulk, cassia, and quantities of other spices which were blended and daily burnt as incense to God. He handed over many of their treasures, too, with temple ornaments in abundance, thus earning, though a prisoner, the pardon granted to deserters. The 18 days the platforms were ready for use, and the 7th of Gorpieos, the Romans brought up their engines. Some of the partisans, already despairing of the city, withdrew from the wall to the citadel. Others plunged into the sewers, but many ranged themselves along the ramparts and tried to repulse the batterers' crew. These too the Romans overwhelmed by numbers and by force, and above all by confidence in face of despondency and half-heartedness. When a section of the wall was broken through, and some of the towers gave way before the assault of the rams, there was an immediate flight from the battlements, and even the party chiefs were filled with terror, unjustified by the situation. Before the enemy got through, They were stunned and ready to fly, and men, once arrogant and bragging about their ungodly deeds, could now be seen abject and trembling, insomuch that even in these vile scoundrels it was pitiful to note the change. See, like, this level of these people, wow, right? You can imagine this kind of thing. Like, think about how crazy you had to be. How, like, what kind of thing was running through your head at this time, right? And and it makes me think of all these guys that do all these horrible things, and they praise anarchy, they praise Satan, they praise all sorts of anti-gods, and they fall into the trap of embodying the mythos of the anti-gods of their script. Their one desire was to dash for the wall that shut them in, repulse the guards, and hack their way through to safety. But when their old faithful supporters were nowhere to be seen, they had been forced to scatter in all directions. And when runners announced that the whole west wall was down, or that the Romans had broken in and were just round the corner seeking them, while others, blinded by terror, declared that from the towers they could actually see the enemy, they fell on their faces, bewailing their own insane folly, and as if hamstrung, were incapable of flight. What happened would serve as an object lesson, showing both the power of God over the wicked and the luck of the Romans. For the party chiefs divested themselves for their safety, and of their own accord came down from the towers, on which they could never have been subdued by force, but only by starvation. And the Romans, who had toiled so hard to break through the weaker walls, captured by sheer luck those the engines could not touch, for no mechanical device could have made any impression on the three towers described elsewhere. Abandoning these, or rather driven down from them by God, they took refuge for a moment in the ravine below Siloam. Later, when they had recovered somewhat from their terror, they made a dash for the nearest section of the Roman wall. But their strength was broken now by terror and disaster, and their courage could not rise to the occasion. So they were repulsed by the guards, scattered this way and that, and plunged into the sewers. Let me double check my my page turnings here. Okay, there's 3 pages left, so we're going to take one more break. Man, these guys, they don't like to do too many slow endings. Everything is an abrupt stop. This whole band it's ridiculously tight. I'm listening to it and it's just like, this is tight. This is like I've never seen something. I've never heard something so tight and visceral at the same time. Like, and I totally get like this kind of like slammy beat. Anyway, so we got 3 pages left. And sorry about that little glitch over there. The button slipped while I was making my transition. Masters now of the walls, the Romans set up their standards on the towers and with clapping and singing celebrated their victory, having found the end of the war much easier than the beginning. They had surmounted the last wall without losing a man. It seemed too good to be true, and when they found no one to oppose them, they could make nothing of it. They poured into the streets, sword in hand, and cut down without mercy all who came within reach, and burnt the houses of any who took refuge indoors, occupants and all. Many they raided, and as they entered in search of plunder, they found whole families dead, and the rooms full of the victims of starvation. Horrified by the sight, they emerged empty-handed. Pity for those who had died in this way was matched by no such feeling for the living. But, by the way, I have heard it said that the Jews that did not go to Palestine are, there were actually more Jews that went to Palestine or to America than went to other places of Europe. Meaning, although I think some of them went to Britain. I can't remember. Forgive me on this level of history. It's probably something I should know while reading this book, because it's a little bit part of the whole situation, but I just can't remember it as absolute fact off the top of my head. But long story short is, too late, I know. That you see, Jerusalem was effectively the first concentration camp, one could say. Technically, every city in Israel during the war was turned into a concentration camp, because that's how you conquer someone at that time, with those population sizes, those technologies at stake, and in those geographies. And all sorts of different people get thrown in internment camps. All sorts of various ethnicities that the Rus people conquered for the for the Russian Empire, the Russian kingdom and all that stuff. Like some Mongolian descendants and all these other guys. They got some of their Muslim portions of the population, and those are like, and I believe those are like migratory Muslims. Like there's like a chain of lineage where they have where like they're descendants of Arabs that also, I guess they went and they lived there for a while or something. Something like that, right? And it might be the same situation for the Uyghurs in China. But anyway, my point is that these people that were not selected, because I think that they were also rejects. I think when the agreement was being made, the Germans were meant to facilitate for the Zionists the selection of the genetically superior Jews to establish the Israeli state. And so they went into the extreme side of the eugenics on a racial level for this plan. And now the Israelis care to do this to the Palestinians, but the Palestinians have the same problem as these degenerates within the culture of Jewish society that they seem to be complete nihilists of sorts. Anti-divine, which is precursor to Antichrist, I suppose you could say. Just men of terrible character committing horrible atrocities on other persons, which is probably a redundancy because it probably can't really call an atrocity unless it's on a living being, right? But it'll always be of the highest emotional response when it's a human on a human, because it's your own kind. It's not even about because humans are superior. It's that it's our own kind. What the fuck's wrong with you? A lot of people like that person, and that person did nothing wrong on any level that deserved death. Right? So the alienation of other people, right? So, like, that's the thing that, see, people believe that nationalism equals alienization. Like, that nationalism means that you've got to be xenophobic and make up all sorts of dehumanizing lies about people that are not within your bloodline by appearance, for the sake of making it easy, because we're not testing each other. We're making assumptions based on, things like phenotypes and other physical features and characteristics. Because that's just natural, like, you're making judgments. That's fine in social situations in context. That is perfectly fine in social situations in context. To have your attitudes that exist within that context move into the scientific study of these traits and features of all of us is psychotic. They ran every man through whom they met and blocked the narrow streets with corpses, deluging the whole city with gore so that many of the fires were quenched by the blood of the slain. N and M are kind of reversible, and slain is an anagram for Islam. You're welcome. At dusk, the slaughter ceased, but in the night, the fire gained the mastery, and on the 8th of Gorpios, the sun rose over Jerusalem in flames, a city that during the siege had suffered such disasters that if from her foundation she had enjoyed as many blessings, she would have been the envy of the world. A city that deserved these terrible misfortunes on no other account than that she produced a generation such as brought about her ruin. When Titus entered, he was astounded by the strength of the city, and especially by the towers, which the party chiefs in their mad folly had abandoned. Observing how solid they were all the way up, how huge each block of stone and how accurately fitted, how great their breadth and how immense their height, he exclaimed aloud, God has been on our side. It is God who brought the Jews down from these strongholds, for what could human hands or instruments do against such towers? At that time, he made many such remarks to his friends, and he set free all persons imprisoned by the party chiefs and found in the forts. Later, when he destroyed the rest of the city and pulled down the walls, he left the towers as a monument to his own luck, which had proved his ally and enabled him to overcome impregnable defenses. As the soldiers were now growing weary of bloodshed and survivors were still appearing in large numbers, Caesar gave orders that only men who offered armed resistance were to be killed and everyone else taken alive. But as well as those covered by the orders, the aged and infirm were slaughtered. Men in their prime who might be useful were helped into the temple and shut up in the court of the women. To guard them, Caesar appointed one of his freed men and his friend Fronto to decide each man's fate according to his deserts. His deserts? Okay. Those who had taken part in sedition and terrorism informed against each other, and Fronto executed the lot. Of the youngsters, he picked out the tallest and handsomest to be kept for the triumphal procession. Of the rest, those over 17 were put in irons and sent to hard labor in Egypt. Oh, that's so accidentally funny. So, while great numbers were presented by Titus to the provinces to perish in the theaters by the sword or by wild beasts, those under 17 were sold. During the days in which Fronto was sorting them out, starvation killed 1,100 of the prisoners, some because the guards hated them too bitterly to allow them any food, others because they would not accept it when offered. In any case, to fill so many mouths there was not even enough corn. Wow. So I kind of want to know what this is. I want to assume he's been selected as a breeder. So I need to know what is the Roman triumphal procession. So either that or maybe he's going to be sacrificed. Okay, so according to DuckDuckGo Assist, which I think is AI, a Roman triumphal procession was a grand parade held in ancient Rome to celebrate a military commander's victory. It involved the general riding in a chariot through the city, showcasing spoils of war, captives, and accompanied by soldiers, marking one of the highest honors a Roman could achieve. Okay, so he's going to be shown off, but then what? Does he just become a slave? Is he just like a handsome slave? Let's see. 1 second. This is worth it. Okay, appearance. Is that a word in here? There's like 2 words for appearance. Kingly as mortal nature. Counts are of the imperial era, public slave or other figure who stands behind or near the triumphant or reminds him that he is but mortal or prompts him to look behind and are open, variety of interpretations and all this. They imply a tradition that the triumphal general was publicly reminded of his mortal nature, whatever his kingly appearance. No, that's something for the royalty. Okay. Shoot. Let's just see here. Companion of a public slave to remind him of the time of his own mortality. Public slave, my chariot with him, and some sort of his children, officers, eldest son rode horseback. Stands behind and near the triumphant to remind him that he is but mortal, prompts to look behind. All right. I tried. I can't find the answer. All the prisoners taken from beginning to end of the war totaled 97,000. Those who perished in the long siege in the long siege would be 1.1 million. 1 million! Over a million! Of these, the majority were Jews by race, but not Jerusalem citizens. They had come together from the whole country for the Feast of Unleavened Bread and had suddenly been caught up in the war, so that first the overcrowding meant death by pestilence, and later hunger took a heavier toll. So, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, by not waiting for this to be over, it made things crazy. So, like, they go in the middle of a whole thing. They're doing a whole thing. There's a whole pilgrimage going on. That's crazy. That's like invading Germany during Wacken Open Air Festival. You insane? But, you know, it's just like everybody knew the Romans were coming. But, you know, they, all of them are just at the fault of their fear of God, I suppose. And, you know, the Roman thing is just like, you know, I'm not going to take pity on you because you're afraid of your God, right? You know, because all their rituals are about making sure that their soul's all good, right? Like, pagan rituals are not about making sure your soul's all good. Pagan rituals are all about getting shit done. Getting shit done. Plain and simple. Not spiritual welfare. Okay, so first overcrowded, later hunger took heavier. That so many could crowd into the city was shown by the census held in Cestius's time. He, wishing to bring home the strength of the city to Nero, who despised the nation, instructed the chief priests to hold a census of the population. If it was possible to do so, they chose the time of the Passover feast, at which sacrifices is offered from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, and as it is not permissible to feast alone, a sort of fraternal group is formed around each victim, consisting of at least 10 diners to each victim, totaling 2.7 million, all ceremonially clean. For persons suffering from leprosy, venereal disease, monthly periods, or any form of defilement were debarred from participation, as were the foreigners who came from abroad in large numbers to be present at the ceremonies. Around each victim, consisting of at least 10 adult males. We're talking about humans? I didn't see animals mentioned anywhere. Are these human sacrifices? So hold a census population. This is offered 3 to 5 in the afternoon, as is not permissible to feast alone. I don't know if they mean, do they mean feast? Is it a cannibal feast? What the hell are they talking about? Or is it just implied by Jewish law that it's a lamb feast? It's fine. It's fine. It's just, it's funny that he didn't mention it, considering how he got cow and lamb in the same fucking sentence about who's kid, literally. But now, fate had decreed that one prison should confine the whole nation, and that a city solid with men should be held fast in war's embrace. No destruction ever wrought by God or man approached the wholesale carnage of this war. Every man who showed himself was either killed or captured by the Romans, and then those in the sewers were fettered out. The ground was torn up, and all who were trapped were killed. There, too, were found the bodies of more than 2,000, some killed by their own hand, some by one another's, but most by starvation, by foul. A stench of human flesh greeted those who charged in that many turned back at once. Others were so avarice that they pushed on, climbing over the piles of corpses, for many valuables were found in the passages, and scruples were silenced by the prospect of gain. Right? Like, this is just animal behavior. This is base animal behavior, which if you have a low IQ population who is operating on a low vocabulary, they have a very, very narrow view of the world and very little understanding of being in the world. And so they cling to the only things that have ever given them something to live for tomorrow, which would be valuables that they can exchange for their hungers and vices. Okay, so every man who showed himself was either killed or captured by the Romans, and then those in the sewers were ferreted out. The ground was torn up, and all who were trapped were killed. There, too, were found the bodies of more than 2,000, some killed by their own hand, some by one another's, but most by starvation. So, yeah, dude, like, they fucking let people fucking suffocate to death in the sewers. Like, not even let them. Like, that's what they just did to them. Collapse them into the fucking tunnels. Like, it's just like, they could have surrendered. They could have, died with a little bit of dignity. Maybe getting maybe standing in a line, getting their throat slit. But no, they had to do it this way. Many prisoners of the party chiefs were brought up, for not even at their last gasp had they abandoned their brutality, but God rewarded them both as they deserved. John, starving to death with his brothers in the sewers, after so many scornful refusals, at last appealed to the Romans for mercy, while Simon, after battling long against the inevitable, as will be described later, gave himself up. John was sentenced to life imprisonment, but Simon was kept for the triumphal procession and ultimate execution. So, the slave boy, does he get executed also? He's less important, so his fate is not explained. But Simon has been a character throughout this book. So the Romans now fired the outlying districts of the town and demolished the walls. So fell Jerusalem in the second year of Vespasian's reign, on the 8th of Gorpios, captured 5 times before, and now for the second time laid utterly waste. Right? It's just like, nobody sat there and, nobody sat there with the intention of conquering Israel because, like, it was like, fuck the Jews as far as them living or not. Right? It's just this crazy, they made it worse on themselves situation. And, it's hard to believe that a whole nation could be that out of it. But such large swaths of this nation seem to be out of it. Smaller swaths now, it would seem, but only on base level, and possibly still in a victim mind state, just a more rational one. Shishak, king of Egypt, followed by Antiochus, then Pompey, and after the Sosius and Herod together captured the city but spared it. Earlier on, not earlier than Shishak, the three figures given here are again far too big. That would be down here. Okay, so all right. So thus the king of Babylon had stormed it and laid it waste in 1468 years, 6 months, and from its foundation it was originally founded by a Canaanite chieftain called in the vernacular King of Righteousness. Interesting. See, this is another thing I want to look up. Who the hell is this? Because he's a fucking Canaanite. A Canaanite, as you know, is a descendant of giants. Canaanite, king of righteousness. Hang on. The Canaanite king of righteousness refers to Melchizedek, who was both a king and a high priest in the ancient city of Salem, believed to be Jerusalem. His name literally means the king of righteousness, and he is recognized in biblical tradition for blessing Abraham and receiving a tithe from him. Okay, so that's quite the thing. So, okay, it was originally founded by a Canaanite chieftain called in the vernacular the king of righteousness. So Melchizedek. So the king, the chieftain Melchizedek, who I believe was a magician. And the Melchizedeks are part of, I don't remember if they're good guys or bad guys in the mythos in the Temple of the White Dragon, but they're there. It's in one of the segments. If it's not in the segments that is explicitly talking about the bad guys, then they are a more specific player in the game. So, for such he was. On the account, he was the first priest of God and the first to build the temple, and in its honor to give the name of Jerusalem to the city previously called Salem. So, it's Salem, and there's Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, perhaps. So, it's kind of like an Abram to Abraham situation. The name is altered. The Canaanite inhabitants were driven out by the Jewish King David, who settled his own people there, and 477 years, 6 months after his time, it was utterly destroyed by the Babylonians. From King David, the first Jew to reign in it, to the destruction by Titus was 1179, which that's where this says the figure's too big. But neither its long history, nor its vast wealth, nor its people dispersed through the whole world, nor the unparalleled renown of its worship sufficed to avert its ruin. So ended the siege of Jerusalem. Dude, it's entirely possible that Josephus might be right with his numbers, but the believed dating system of the time of this publishing would want to make sure that it confirmed that those particular facts were wrong. Because like I said, there's a lot of interesting facts and figures in here that are not questioned. And I think that's it. Yes. So the temple's destroyed, and then the rest of Jerusalem is destroyed, and then Roman celebrations. That's going to be interesting. I wonder what the Roman celebrations are going to sound like. If he talks about what Roman celebrations were saying, that's going to tell us a whole lot about the Roman Empire's general attitude, especially the hardcorest of Roman citizens, the most involved in the Empire's affairs. So that's it, guys.